I'm going to get us started though. In the chat box, I'm throwing up the resource sheet that we have for today's session on writing. I'm excited today that it's going to be a collaborative workshop on different ways to use storytelling, writing, and creative thinking so that you can help spark your students' creativity and engagement in the classroom. I'm Darcy Bach-Garrett, and I am super excited today because I get to be joined by two rock star teachers who are doing some really cool collaborative things with writing in their classrooms. So I would just let the two of them introduce themselves.
Can I go first? Hi, I'm Wendy Beekler. I have been teaching English at Ashley Public School for 2.5 years. A fun fact is I actually graduated from Ashley, and this is my old English room that is now my new English room.
I love that.
Hi, I'm Jessica Schmidt, and I have been teaching in Ashley for 12 years, but I also taught in Montana for 3 years, and I've been in Ashley for 12 years in the 3rd grade classroom, and I absolutely love it.
And you're a bit hard to hear right now, at least for me, Jessica, and so thanks for that. Also in Ashley, I didn't know that you were in Montana prior to teaching here in Ashley.
Yep, we taught for 3 years, 4 years in Montana, actually. So.
Very cool. And I can also attest that I was down in Ashley during homecoming week, and Wendy was also their homecoming queen, I believe.
Yes, I was.
And so she and her students had, I would imagine, a pleasant little time reminiscing about that. So we're going to dive in. The focus of today is going to be on using a couple different tech tools to help. I look at it almost as tricking kids into doing writing, and they don't even really realize that they're writing. So there are a couple tools. We're going to dive into Storyboard, and then as we have time, we'll touch on Adobe Spark and Clarisketch as a couple different ways that you can help kids be more confident in their writing and do writing activities without them getting quite so stressed about writing. And maybe that's an attribute more of upper high school. I was a high school English teacher, and I found that anytime I mentioned the word writing, a lot of juniors and seniors would go into this weird, like, shut down, freaked out panic mode, even if it was a short writing assignment. And yet that same kid could talk to me for 10 minutes about different ideas. So these are some strategies just to help get your students writing and thinking and showing their thinking out loud to you and help them develop some of those writing skills. So our objectives today are pretty straightforward. We want to be able to use Storyboard in the classroom, and then Adobe Spark and Clarisketch as we have time. We're going to explore a couple different ways to use these classroom resources. This is where Wendy and Jessica are going to be invaluable because they're going to share with you some actual student samples of things that they have gotten kids to write and do in class. And it's pretty lovely, the things that they're able to get their kids to do. And they'll also share some collaboration that they've been doing between their grade levels. So even though Wendy's high school and Jessica is in 3rd grade, they've been able to maximize the proximity of being in a small school together. And then we hope that as we're going through these resources, you are actively thinking, how would I use this in my class? And you will share out with all of us so that we can all get better at doing our jobs. You will share out those ideas with everybody. So I want to jump over to that shared document. I have put that in the chat box a couple times, so hopefully you have access to that. I just want to show you that you have, and I'll throw it in there one more time just in case. I want to show you that you have quick access to a lot of these resources. So don't worry about having to jot down a whole bunch of web addresses or have to find things. Here is our slide deck right here at the top, so you can access that. Here's how you can contact Jessica, Wendy, or me if you have any questions about these tools. There are some Storybird resources here and some examples from these other resources as well. So this will be a helpful resource, particularly this getting started. When you do get to the point, if you choose to be using Storybird, this is a step-by-step guide of how you can take your students through the instructions of using Storybird in your classroom. That's where all those resources are. Back here on our Storybird, I think there's a lot of different ways that you could use a resource like this. Certainly the obvious writing prompts that you can do and have kids do short stories, poems, and things like that. But you can also be creative with any of these tools. Make a history into a narrative, dramatize a math concept or a social studies concept. I don't see any reason why you couldn't use Storybird even in subjects that aren't English, because there are 0 subjects in school where you're not doing some writing. So this could be a cool, creative way to have kids think about other concepts and have to explain a math concept, a science concept, using a graphic. And I think you could even do some cool things with some research papers. This is what you have for options on Storybird. We're going to go to the website in just a moment here, but you have 3 basic choices when you're setting up your Storybird assignments. You can do a book that is several pages long. You can do a chapter book, which are the long form stories, or you can do a poetry prompt, which is 1 image, and then you type your response to that. So lots of opportunities for different formats. I personally have only used the picture books and the poetry slides. I was never doing a project that warranted multiple chapters and kind of a long form. I found that the picture book option was always long enough for anything that I wanted to do. So feel free to explore the long form, but I haven't used it. Wendy, Jessica, where would you say you and your kids spend most of your time?
I have done picture books only. In April, I plan on doing the poetry since it's poetry month and that type of thing. But I've only done the picture books. I haven't done long form.
Okay.
And the 3rd graders have used picture books too, just because the picture sort of helps them with writing their story and knowing where to go. So we've just done the picture books.
Great. Okay. So I think that's pretty common, and certainly other people feel free to explore those chapter books. I would love some ideas on how you might use something like that. When the students go into Storybird, they can choose from galleries of really cool, beautiful photos. So this is one of the things that gets kids more excited about the idea of telling a story, or that's my experience, that by looking at some of these pictures, they have a whole new take on what is possible in their writing, because now they have this beautiful image. I've also found that this is a nice way to give them something to write about. Those kids who struggle to come up with, well, what do I say? I don't know what to say. This is Bill, and he likes to play football. Well, when they have a picture there that they're using as their basis for their story, I found that it gives them a lot more to write about, even if it's just contextual detail of describing the picture or pointing out details of the picture. So there are all kinds of cool, different collections, a lot of different variations. One thing to know for kids is once they pick a collection, they are, I think, unfortunately, they're limited to only being able to use the photos that are in that collection. But as we go through, that limitation, I think, can force some pretty cool creativity. So we're going to switch over and actually dive into Storybird itself and show you what that looks like. So I am going to give control over to Wendy so that she can show you some of what Storybird looks like from her perspective as a teacher, so that she can show you some of the things of, how she sets up assignments, and she's pre-selected some student examples so that we can also see what do these Storybird projects look like when they're produced?
Okay, so this is an example of one of my 8th graders. They had an assignment that we were working on kind of word choice and that type of thing, and they had to include multiple descriptive adjectives. They needed to use action verbs that weren't your normal, like ran, walked, that type of thing. And then they also had to include sensory details. This is one of my students who she does very well in writing anyways. But this was her very first page, and I think that it's just amazing with the descriptive words that she used, and like that she got all of that from this picture alone. So if you look, like the scent of pine trees flooded the air, because usually they would have just said the scent of pine trees was in the air, you know, always constantly using the linking verbs and that type of thing. So they had to change that and do something bigger than that. So this is one of her best examples. And if you we go through walking into the aging cabin, again, we were working a little bit with like participles and that type of thing. So she is by far one of my best writers with this. I was going to show one of my lower level writing students, but it was still, if you didn't see the previous writing, there was no way to show that it was much better. So I don't have a sample of that, but Jessica will. But I wanted to kind of show a poetry thing. So I was gonna do something for Valentine's Day, and then I ended up not doing it. But this is an example of the poetry that you can do. And one of the things with the poetry is you are only given a set number of words. So I had to create this through the words that they gave me. And so you kind of just steal and pick in that type of thing. For high school students, it can be a little bit challenging, but it can also be a little bit easier. But for like the younger grades, I feel like that's something, because it's really hard for them to come up with words, you know, that are beyond what's in their vocabulary and what they're used to. So this was just kind of a poetry example of what you can do with it. You can move them and place them however you want. I just ended up doing that because I thought it actually sounded like something and not just a jumbled mess. But this is like an example of what I will be doing with them at Poetry Month, because we always like to focus on like one type of poem, and then we kind of showcase it with the school and that type of thing. So this is just an example of the poetry things that you can do on there.
I actually, as a high school theater teacher who taught quite a bit of improv as well, I love the idea of giving students a project like this that comes somewhat prepackaged, and then it's all about creatively using those resources in a way that reflects what you want to say. So frequently kids think that they need this blank page and a wide open sheet and they should be creative. But I have found that frequently kids get far more creative when they have some structure and limitations. And I love your point, Randy, that for younger kids, not having to find the words, just having to creatively organize them into a different idea. And then how cool to be able to then compare. You all started with the same thing. Look at how we all took the same content, the same image, the same words, and look at all the different things we created. That's cool. Do you have another example, or will you show us just a little bit of what it looks like to start an assignment for a teacher here in Storybird?
Okay, so when you are a teacher on this, you'll have different classes that you can go to. So I have my 3 that I've used so far this year with my English 10, 8, and 9, and they are given a code so that they can enter into the class and they can see the assignments. And so you can create your assignments through here. So my 10th graders did a plot and setting assignment, and then you can just click create, and it gives you can put in what the assignment is about, that type of thing. Once they have created it, you have now created it, you just click on it. They click do this assignment, and then from there they get to find and search all of this. I showed the kids because a lot of them thought that you could only choose the ones that show up here, but that's not the case at all. You can search whatever you want to search. So if you want to write a story about rainbows, you just type in rainbows and whatever comes up, you know.
Will you click on one of the lightning bolts to show, you can get a sneak peek at the other images that are in that gallery by clicking on that lightning bolt?
Yep. And so if the assignment is for a picture book, you just click picture book, and then these are the collection pictures that you can choose from. Yep. And if you go here, you can choose a different one, and you just drop and drag for the cover. If you want to add slides, where's my thing at? You just click the little plus button, and then you can drag. One nice thing about this is you can make the picture as big as you want. So like here, this is kind of the smaller version of it, so you have more room to type. If you want it to be a bigger picture to include the full length of it, then that box just gets shortened. You can also, it's sometimes tricky, I get that one, let's go this one. Maybe not to go above, and then you're typing down here. Same with, I think you can also move it to come down so that you're typing up there. So, and then you just keep,
Go ahead.
So you just keep kind of adding, you can go through. One of the things that I have really liked my students to do is they need to lay out all of their pictures before they even start typing. Because one of the things that I found, because I created one as an example for my students for the adjective adverb, and I ended up writing a really horrible story because I didn't plan out my thing. I'm like, well, I'll just go with it and see what comes up. Well, that was a terrible idea. So I told my kids that, because usually we have to do outlines, I said, lay out your pictures now instead of creating that outline, and create the story from the pictures that you're given. And that has definitely helped them because they already have it written and they already have the pictures laid out and everything. So that has helped them, and even though some of them think it's a tedious task, they're very happy at the end of it when they have a story that's finished and I don't have to go back and tell them, okay, but what's your conflict? Where are your characters? What is happening? So that definitely helps.
Yeah, that's a great tip, that with this kind of format, like I said, this is where I think Wendy's found a beautiful way of taking what might be a deficiency or something that's limiting about Storybird and turning it into an advantage for her students. Because you are limited to those pictures that you see on her screen around that empty space. Those are the pictures in that collection. So those are the pictures that they can work with. So when I was helping Jessica with this, there were some kids who were like, well, now I want the bear to be eating, blah, blah, blah. They had these ideas, but there weren't pictures that fit with those ideas. So kids can end up getting frustrated. But if you take advantage of Wendy's tip and have them lay out the story first visually, which is just storyboarding. That's how movies are made. That's how videos are produced. Like, that's a great visual organizer. Then they know that they have the progression of what they want to talk about in their story without coming up with this whole story and then trying to find pictures from it. Storybird really works a bit better if kids explore the pictures first, and then I'll be cheesy here and say, discover the story as they explore the pictures. If they come with too much pre-written, they're probably going to just get frustrated.
Yeah. And like some of my high school kids, I think for the high achieving ones, this is maybe a little bit too easy for them because they kind of can come up on their story on their own. But my 8th grade class, which I have a lot of writers who struggle with going beyond. I have so many farm kids in that class that just want to write about cows. And so that's all they ever write about is their cows, which is fine if that's something that interests you. But this makes them write a story beyond what they would write. And I think that that really helps because, and then plus they never know what to write about. So the ones that struggle with writing and coming up with ideas and coming up with a good story, making that conflict, these pictures help them, because there are some that you could put together multiple stories from it, because it's just like the pictures themselves tell a story. These maybe are a little bit harder because they're just random pictures. So this would be better for your high achieving ones, but there are ones that definitely just tell the story through the pictures, and they just have to bring words out to tell them. So that's why this has actually worked really well for my lower achieving ones, because the story is there, they just have to write about it.
That's really cool. So pretend that you're a student right now, Wendy, in this platform. So how do you save your thing so that you can access it at a different time? You're here and you're working in class. What would you do from here so that you can come back to this project tomorrow?
Okay, so you cannot save it without having some type of title. So we'll just call it Storybird for now. And then you go to save and exit. And then it will ask you if you want to publish it, which for students, it doesn't actually publish to the Storybird world, because you can actually go on and just read stories by other people. So if it's a student, it's just privately published to you, the teacher, in like that class. Like the class can view others' stories. But I always tell them that we're just going to do my story isn't finished yet. But when it is published, I think they can still work on it, right? Mm-hmm. I think so. So either way, it doesn't really matter. They can still publish it. But I tell my students you cannot publish it until it has been revised and edited multiple times, and that it's ready to hand in, because then on my end, a green arrow shows up, and that shows me that they are done and it's ready to be graded. So I always have them say my story isn't finished yet, and then it just takes them back to their dashboard. And when I wrote it, I get 5 points.
When they save that story as it's not finished yet, can you as a teacher still see it so you can see their progress?
Yeah, so when you go to Studio and you want to view these classes, I don't have any, oh, I do, my freshman class isn't published yet. So right now, well, that one, my student messed up. But this shows that they aren't published yet, but I can still go in and view them, which actually kind of saves time for me, because I can go in and review them by myself and leave notes to the students, which is kind of nice, because especially with my class of 18 or whatever I have, that saved me time, because I could go in and write comments being like, are we sure this is what we want to do yet? That type of thing. So this is the publish to show that they are done and they are graded.
Very cool. I'm going to switch over to Jessica so that she can share. She has a great example of how much growth a student experienced by having to / getting to use Storybird. And also, similar to Wendy, a really nice, just really authentic conversation about publishing. My story is still in progress versus when is it publishable? And the cool thing that you can do with Storybird, once the kids have published their stories, parents can order copies of those books if they wanted to. So if you used one of these Storybird activities as a class project or for a student reflection on something, students would have the option to be able to buy this printed storybook if they wanted to give it to someone or have it as a grade school, high school memento.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is an example of one of my third graders' journals, and this was only probably, I don't know, a couple months ago. And the assignment was that you could be any animal, what would you want to be and why? And this was the response I got. I want to be a black panther, and you can see, and then this sentence down here is actually mine. This same student, when we introduced Storybird, has gone from writing this in his journal to writing, this is one of his stories that he has written, A Walk in the Park. And it has, and yes, I mean, we're third graders. They definitely needed to have, he had the pictures and stuff, but he said Central Park, he's gonna have a race. He's talking to a ladybug, and he has Max and Zach, and Matt has found a friend, and then there's some porcupines. But he has gone from saying that he hated writing, and how many sentences does it have to be? You mean you want me to write 5 sentences? I can't do 5 sentences. To this story without, the only thing I helped him with was the spelling mistakes, and he did the rest by himself. So that is one of the reasons that I think Storybird is so effective for the 3rd graders. They're able to look at the pictures, and he is one of my lower students, but still, he has gone from writing just that 1 sentence to a whole story that he is ready to publish and edit and proofread and all of the steps.
And has that changed at all how he feels about writing? Does he
Yes.
realize that this is writing?
He does. And his journals have gotten a little bit better because I still want him to journal once a week. But as far as writing in the classroom and daily 5, he chooses work on writing at least twice a week in daily 5, just so he can get onto Storybird. And he actually has, if I go back to Storybird and go back to my account, I believe he has 5 stories he's working on right now, and they're all about 6 pages long. And that's one thing that the 3rd graders, we really, really talk about. They like the pictures. They like using the pictures to write their stories. And the thing that we talk about is that we're going through the writing process. So looking at the pictures is the pre-writing. What is your story going to be about? And then from there, his was a walk in the park. And then from there, they write their story. And one thing that when Wendy was talking as a teacher, I don't know if you can see right down here where it says story text and everything. Mm-hmm. I don't have to go through all of his pictures. I can just look right in here and read what his story was about without actually going through all the pictures. And I sort of like that just as a fast proofreading it and editing it and that. So first there's the pre-writing of looking at the pictures, and then they write their story, their first draft. And then they have to read it with a partner, or another student has to read it to give them ideas on how they could make it more interesting. We're starting now to add dialogue. This one he finished a couple weeks ago, so it didn't have any dialogue in it. And then I conference with all of them one-on-one, and we go through and we edit it and we proofread it. And they have to go through all of those steps before they get to publish it. And then one thing that they like is after they published it, they get to go read it to the preschoolers. But my big thing with the Storybird is how much it has helped them with their writing. And like you said, they don't even realize that they are going from writing 1 sentence to a whole story. And they're so happy when they get to go read it to the preschoolers, and they've gone through they know the words. That was my goal this year, is to really make sure they know pre-writing, drafting, editing, proofreading, and publishing. And with Storybird, it's all in one thing.
I love that their reward for having a published, finished product is getting to show off their story and have story time with the preschoolers. And you're certainly lucky in Ashley, but you're not alone in North Dakota, that you are all in the same building physically. So for the 3rd graders to walk down the hallway to read a story to the preschoolers is very doable. Where at West Fargo, where I was, there would be cars and buses involved. That makes it a little bit more complicated. So I love that you're taking advantage, and that's the reward. Storybird does have, and you saw this when Wendy said, I'm still working on my story. She got a badge for adding another story into her thing. There is a badge system in Storybird, so students can earn different little badges, and there are different challenges that, write a story about this. And so Storybird has some kind of cool built-in prompts. So you can see this, you can see the daily writing, you can get different prompts for that, different badges. And they do have an ongoing writing challenge. I don't remember how often they update the challenge. Is it once a week that there's a writing challenge? It's at least once a month that they have a different writing challenge topic. So you could use that as a station writing in your classroom, right? You as a teacher don't have to come up with the prompt. Just use Storybird's writing challenge for that week, that month, and have students do that. But you said that you found that the getting to read to the preschoolers was a much better reward than the badges that are online.
Yeah, they there's other programs that have different. We use Prodigy too, and with Prodigy, the better you do on math, you get to change your outputs and stuff. For my third graders, the badges aren't really that big of a thing. They would much rather be able to go read to preschoolers, and they don't even really the badges except for the first day when they started. They said, "Oh, there's something new," and then after that, there wasn't any interest in it.
Okay. And I will say, I got to be in Jessica's room the first day that the students were exploring Storybird. And I want to second what she said. There were 0 students who said, how long is this story supposed to be? No one asked, how many sentences do I have to write? I was blown away because even as a high school teacher, the number of times that I was asked, how many pages? I can't even count the number of times that kids would ask me that. How many paragraphs? How many pages? And when the third graders were set loose on Storybird, they just started writing. And they were more focused on having the exposition, the conflict, the rising action, the climax, and the resolution of developing the story than they were on how many specific pages does this have to be. So that was something that was, maybe your kids are all just geniuses and they were just, extra polite the day that I was there. But that was another thing that I thought was pretty cool. Can the two of you talk about some of the strategies that you've talked about of being able to collaborate with your high school students, with the third graders and other elementary school students?
Yeah, so my 10th graders, we did the plot and setting a character stories. I had all of the students in that class, I think I had 8 at that time or 7. They went to grade K through 6. They read their stories to them, and elementary kids were given a critique sheet to their level of understanding what plot is, what characters are, that type of thing. They actually critiqued stories of those 10th graders because I told them your whole main goal is to create a children's book, and we want to learn something from it, focus on the theme, that type of thing. So it was kind of like, instead of writing a whole chapter book or a whole short story, whatever, it was a lot easier for them just to go on to the Storybird and do it, and then it was accessible to all the kids to do it. And it was kind of as an introduction. I didn't use Storybird before, and it was kind of a new thing with everybody else.
You're cutting it out a little bit sound-wise. Can you say that last sentence again?
Okay. Okay. So we ended up, the kids critiqued it, and then the high schoolers got that critique sheet back from them.
How did the elementary schoolers feel at being empowered to be writing experts, of like them getting to say, I liked this story, I didn't like this about this story, and getting to share their opinions as critics to the big kids?
I really enjoyed having it was a soft class.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Together. My third graders really enjoyed having the soft ones come in and read their story and being able to give them advice and stuff. They were a little shy when they were in there, but the fact that they had a rubric printed for them so they could also write on it and they didn't necessarily have to talk to the sophomores and say what they thought, I think that helped a lot too, because they were a little bit more honest, whereas they might not have said anything if it was just, well, did you like the story? So it worked out well that they were able to write about it, and they were excited to have someone come and read a story to us on the active board.
did that process while the students were reading and the third graders were having to do a rubric and kind of assess? Did that help them reinforce some of those writing concepts of the different elements of a story that you are also talking about in third grade as they were listening to the 10th graders' story?
I think the main thing it did for the third graders was the sophomores came in and read to them before we had started Storybird.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that I said, okay, we're going to be reading from Storybird, and then next week or the week after, we're going to start writing on Storybird in our classroom, it really made them excited for when they got to go on there and make their own stories. So that was the big thing the third graders took away from it, was just the excitement of being able to write their own stories.
That's cool. I think for me, that's huge. If you can do anything that gets kids excited about having to write, that's mind-blowing to me. Wendy, you shared that you had another idea about how to maximize and help the 10th graders more as editors be able to help mentor the younger students in addition to just sharing the stories that the 10th graders wrote.
Yeah, so Jess and I have talked that we wanted to have my 10th graders kind of proofread or help the third graders write stories. And I would use that because a lot of times one of the hard things I have found with like peer editing or writing workshop is getting my kids to actually edit work and write good comments and what could be better about it. I think a lot of times because their writing is so similar to one another, it's hard for them to see the mistakes, to see the what they're doing. So we had talked that we were going to bring one of your kids maybe shouldn't be doing that.
I'm sorry, we're getting a lot of feedback on you again.
I don't know what's going on.
That's fine. It's part of learning. So just go back to your goal of why your students weren't always doing great peer editing in your class and how you hoped that this process, I think that's what you were in the process of saying.
Yeah, so I was hoping that my kids would learn from looking at a younger student's writing to help them see the bigger mistakes of like a third grade class that could be the smaller mistakes in a 10th grade class, to just kind of help them learn how to do better peer editing workshop. And then I would also help the third graders with their writing as well, and kind of getting, instead of a teacher coming in and seeing it, have another student coming in and talking about it.
A third teacher, I think will help, because in third grade you still need to do a lot of one-on-one. I mean, they're spelling words wrong, they have no idea about commas, and they don't always know where to go with their story. I mean, one page it might be something, and then when they see the picture, the next page has nothing to do with what it was happening on the first page. So even to have the one-on-one with one of the older kids, I think would be so helpful in actually proofreading and editing and making their story flow better.
That's a great point, that the kids, that it just gives those built-in mentors. So if you are in a building and you can hear there's built-in benefits for both classes. So what a great use of resources. So if you're at a school where you can do something like that, what a great collaborative process. The 10th graders can go down and help mentor. So it's helping reinforce the editing skills that the 10th graders are already doing. And it helps them reinforce that this is a necessary part of the process. And it hopefully, I would think, makes them feel a little bit better about the growth that they have had in their writing. Of even those who are like, I'm not a great writer, they're like, oh, well, at least I'm better. Like, I've advanced past elementary school writing. And then for the elementary school kids, it's giving them a one-on-one tutor to help them expand and try different ideas. So I think that's a cool collaboration that you can both grades benefit, and the end product can be a bit better than what was there before. I'm putting up just some additional ideas for ways that you could use Storybird with students. And so the first one is pretty similar to what Wendy was sharing for the poetry idea of give all the students the same picture or the same prompt, and then have them write a poem or a short story connected to that. I like the idea of finding, if I was doing Frankenstein, I would find a picture of, a chemistry set, right? And just put that chemistry photo on there and have the students do a short write of make a connection. Tell us your own scientific experiment. Imagine that you are in Frankenstein's lab and you can use these tools. What would your experiment look like? So you could certainly take a picture, or certainly from history, when George Washington crossed the Delaware, we know that it was very icy and cold. So here's a picture of icy cold. Write what you think George Washington and his soldiers were thinking and feeling as they made this journey. So I think there would be a lot of different ways to integrate some of these short little prompts as nice additional writing reflections for any subject. So we talked about the partnering with another class or grade for peer editing and for student reviewers. You could certainly do a student portfolio. Maybe that's an opportunity to use the chapter book and do a chapter on each concept or unit that you want students to do a little bit of ongoing reflection on what they've been working on throughout the year. Do remember you can't upload pictures, unfortunately, so this would be a much more of a creative challenge. They do have those built-in challenges, so you could use those as some easy writing prompts. And I like the idea of just having those writing stations. Jessica mentioned that during her free time, some of her students choose to go to Storybird to continue working on the stories that were assigned, but also additional stories that they want to work on. What she was talking about is she told me about Prodigy, this math program that allows kids to play and work on different math concepts that are connected to their class. So if you're in elementary school or you're doing math, it sounds like a pretty cool game. And when the third graders were showing it to me, they were very proud because they earn, like Jessica said, they can earn coins to buy different outfits for their little avatar going around playing these different math games. But having a math station where they're doing Prodigy on one part of the day, and then they have Storybird as a station, and they have a Scratch Junior coding station, and they have these various stations that they can hit on throughout the week that just keeps them writing, keeps them practicing these basic skills. As we get into some of these other resources, I want to pause so that if you have questions, we went through how to use Storybird pretty quickly. I will show you in this slide deck, and again, on our resource page under Storybird, it's right here, a slide deck with step-by-step instructions. If you open that up, this has some step-by-step instructions. These are set up for your students. So this is a slide deck you're free to use of how to guide your students through setting up their account. As you do this with your students, this is a rare thing. I tend not to recommend things that require student accounts because students have to remember their login and password, and sometimes that can get frustrating. But this is one that I think it's worth it. I do have this note right in the slide deck. If you are working with students, if they already have a username for something else, help them out here and encourage them to use the same username and password. So when Jessica was doing this with her students, she had them use their same Prodigy login, username, and password that they used for this math game so that they could remember it. As a high school teacher, I refused to keep track of my students. Maybe I'm just too mean, but I refused to keep track of their username and passwords. But if you're teaching younger students, I think that's a good idea just to help ease people's lives. So they'll create a username and password, and then click this create the account button. And then what you'll need to do is give them your class code. Wendy mentioned that when she was in her account, there's just a class code. This is how, as a high school teacher, you can have multiple classes. So they have to join the class that you give them. Once they enter that code, they are then able to start exploring and searching the artwork and playing around with what they want to do. And you're able to give them assignments. So this is, make sure you have a good 5 to 10 minutes planned for the day that you want them to create their accounts so that you have time to troubleshoot and help them out. When we did this in Jessica's classroom, I put the code right here in the slide deck, but you could also write it on the board or have it wherever else you want. Then the slide deck just walks them through that you're going to use this art, that they're making a picture book, and it gives you, at least for her class, these were some of the learning objectives that as you start planning your story, think about these key concepts. But certainly you're going to modify this based on what your class is actually working on. So this slide deck is for you to use. It's for however it makes sense for your classroom. And I do think that just having that, helps get them through that process a little bit easier. So that's how you do the setup. Do you have other questions for Jessica and Wendy as the Storybird experts who are using this in their classroom? How they're doing it, how they got it set up, how they did this with their students, anything that you want to know so that you can go back and feel like you could use Storybird in your classroom. Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask a question. Feel free to use the chat feature that's over in the side to throw up any questions into that chat. Jessica has already responded to that. So if you have questions, go ahead and post those while you're thinking, while you're posting, because I have a hard time with awkward silences. I'm going to just show you a little bit for Adobe Spark. This is a short way for kids to design little online ads, graphics, some videos even. And I like the idea of using this for short writing assignments, making kids think creatively and using the power of their pictures to make one slide visual poetry or little summaries. So on our example here under Adobe Spark, there are some different ideas on how to use Adobe Spark in the classroom and different things that you can add. Do your high school learning research project, some Spark videos. So this is right from Adobe Spark, but you can check out some different ways that you can use Adobe Spark. I used it. I made my students, my classes do little character reflections. And so this is a character reflection that the kids created. So they had to use at least 2 photos to do this reflection. And so this is, as we were reading Hamlet, so Ophelia reflecting on her life with Hamlet. And then 1 sentence, well, I guess 2 sentences, the so alone is there. And then these visual representations of how Ophelia is feeling in the play. So really short, and then what we would do is students would print these or they would email them to me and I would print them. So printing was never an excuse if they couldn't do it because they can always just share the image with me. And then I would hang these up around the room and we would do a little gallery walk. And I would have another piece of paper hanging underneath this image. And then students could write Ophelia a note back as one of the other characters. They could give her advice. They could ask her a question. They could make a general comment about her behavior. And so as they walked around and did this gallery walk, and it was a pretty short activity, right? If the kids had them all printed, I would just have tape sitting out and we would just hang them up around the room. And I would have the other piece of paper. I'd be giving the kids a second piece of paper as they came in and they would tape up both. And then it was like a 5-minute gallery walk. They just walked around with a pen or a pencil and they had to ask some questions at the different prompts. Then I would take both the images and those pieces of paper from the gallery walk of where kids had asked their questions, and I would use those for our class discussion. So we would circle up, and certainly you could do a fishbowl, have an inner circle, be the characters, and then you could ask those questions and have the characters have to start reflecting on those things. But otherwise, most of the time, we just did a straight up discussion. But this gave us a whole different perspective and a different way of talking about the characters. And I found that it helped kids relate more to the people in the play. And this is an activity that you could do for history. I think you could make one of these visual slides for a math concept or a science concept, right? What does it mean to be an ionic bond? And have an ionic bond visually represented in this kind of abstract way with a sentence of what does it mean when you're ionic, and then have your chemistry students talk about that. And certainly you could give everyone the same character or same concept, and then have the class compare which of these captures the best the overall feeling of the character. So that's just one tiny assignment. And this was not something that took a terribly long time. You could certainly require the students to use a quote from the book or from the text on the slide as well. I didn't for this one. It was just kind of free thought reflection when we had gotten through about halfway through the play, so that Ophelia was still alive at this point. So spoiler alert, if you haven't read Hamlet, Ophelia dies. Sorry, I just ruined that for all of you. The other one that I wanted to share oh so briefly is Clarisketch. Clarisketch is a little bit like Chatterpix. So with Chatterpix, you take a picture and you draw a line and then you record your voice. And thanks for letting me know, Jessica. When you draw a line and then you record your voice and you can make it talk, and maybe all of you have a remedy for me, but from what I found, Chatterpix is only available on Apple products, and so I haven't been able to use Chatterpix very much. But Clarisketch is a pretty simple thing that does almost the same thing. So you take a picture, you can't make the picture talk, but you can draw on the picture, you can circle things on the picture, and you still record your voice. So this is one of those simple programs that I think can help trick students into writing, because they won't necessarily think they're writing. But this is a great way to make them explain their thinking in a format that isn't physically writing something, but requires the same depth of thought as a written response. So they can take a picture of either something they've created, they can take a picture that they find online, they could take a picture of their own journal. So they could have to do a journal reflection, or you could certainly use this in math. Have them take a picture of their math problem and then explain to you how they got their answer by circling things on their math problem. If I was doing this for English, I did not do this, but I would love to use this as a form of peer editing, where students simply take a picture of one paragraph and then they give feedback, or they give themselves, they do their own self-critique, and then they can share that with me. The other thing that you can do is you can use this in order to give students feedback. So you can take a picture of their homework, and instead of writing all of these things, which we frequently do as teachers, take a picture of their essay, of the first page, right? And then just record and give them some feedback of, this paragraph isn't working right now because of this. I want you to look back and go into this. You could certainly use this to record assignments. Same thing, take a picture of the assignment and then record yourself giving an explanation of the assignment, and then post that so that kids who are absent, or if you could send that to parents so that parents have the exact same information. but ClaraSketch is pretty simple and easy to use, and I think is just a handy way to, like I said, trick people into doing this. I'm not seeing any questions coming in. Sorry that some of my sound was cutting in and out. Hopefully it's okay now as we're going through. But feel free still to put up any questions. Wendy, Jessica, do you have any closing advice for teachers of things that you're doing, or just final words of inspiration for getting these little buggers to write more?
The sound is being weird. Thing is a lot of if I have just have them. I have a whole book of different prompts, or if we're working on something, I just tell them to write on that, and then it's not necessarily graded, but it's
I think Storyboard does a good job of having the pictures there so that the kids can sort of let their story just come to the picture and they're a hard time writing a story. And at the same time, it's a chance for them to make a story. They can
It was good there for a while. It was good there for a while, but now you sound like you're like talking backwards somehow in like a weird editing. So I'm not sure what our microphone problems are today between me and you. But the gist that I could gather, and maybe you can just head nod if this sounds like it, Wendy, part of your point was having a whole, it was having a resource of different prompts so you kind of have a go-to tool. And I love this advice. I think this is what you said, of letting go of having to grade everything and helping the kids understand that the editing process is on them as much as it is on us as teachers, and that we don't have to grade fully and give comments on every single thing that they do. Was that slivers? Those were the slivers that I could kind of hear.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure why it's so funky, because it was so good at the beginning, and now even just your response, I couldn't understand anything that you just said. Such is life. There are days, I guarantee you, there are days where the students in my classroom had no idea what I was saying because it was a weird day. And then they would come back the next day and I'd go, I feel like we need to try that again because I was a bit out of it yesterday. So people who are attending, you have our email addresses. If you do have questions or you want some additional support, given our wonky sound issues, I think I'm just going to wrap it up there. It is 5 o'clock. I don't want to keep people past their time. I would love to hear any feedback. So this little short link is a link to a feedback form, just a generic, it's 3 short questions. So if you have 30 more seconds and you're willing to give a little bit of feedback and help make this and other webinars better and more productive for you as teachers, more helpful, what do you want to hear about in your classroom, please let me know. If you are available to make it, I want to just do one quick shout out. We're hosting EdCamp North Dakota coming up April 7th in Mandan and in Mayville. So if you're looking for PD credit and a great collaborative conversation, so there are no keynotes, the whole day will be based off of suggestions from teachers that morning of what you want to talk about. So the whole day is focused on teachers being entrusted as experts and giving each other support and advice and resource suggestions. So check out EdCamp at edcampnd.k12.nd.us. Feel free to email if you have questions about that, but the event itself is free. Continuing ed credit is extra, but is available for those events. So join us in Mandan or Mayville on April 7th and get some great collaboration in with other teachers in North Dakota. All right. Well, thank you so much, Wendy and Jessica, for joining this afternoon. I love seeing your student examples and hearing about the really cool collaboration that the two of you are developing. I think that's a beautiful relationship for your students and also a great way to help spark that writing in the classroom.